Hello and welcome back, and everybody, Levi here, and today I got another deck tech here for you from the new Lost Caverns of Ixalan set. We've got an Orzhov commander this time. It's Vito, Fanatic of Aclazotz, 2 white black for a 4/4 vampire demon with flying. It says, whenever you sacrifice another permanent, you gain 2 life if this is the first time this ability has resolved this turn. If it's the second time, each opponent loses 2 life. If it's the third time, you create a 4/3 white black vampire demon creature token with flying. So you might look at this commander and think, oh, this is just another aristocrats deck. You know, you make a bunch of tokens or you do a lot of swapping in and out of graveyards, just sacrificing small creatures to get a bunch of value off your commander, similar to like a ELSL Core or something like that, any other Orzhov aristocrats deck. But I thought of a much more interesting, in my opinion, way to go about doing a quote-unquote aristocrats theme with Vito. So the theme that I came up with was finding cards that sacrifice themselves to their own ability to then do things that you already want to do in the deck. So a good example of what I'm talking about here is going to be first up our removal category. So we can talk about things like Executioner's Capsule. It's a single black for an artifact. You pay 1 in a black, tap it, and sacrifice it, and then you destroy target non-black creatures. So instead of having your removal on an instant or a sorcery, such as like, you know, Swords of Plowshares or whatever, which I do have in the deck, but that's just a backup as opposed to like a primary way of killing things. So this is also instant speed as long as you have it on the field already. So you drop this turn 1, and by the time you have your commander out, you're ready to use this whenever you really have the 2 mana up, and that takes place of your removal spells at instant speed, but it also sacrifices which triggers our commander. So that's the kind of thing I'm talking about in this deck. That's the kind of thing I want to do. There's categories you're going to need in the deck, but I want to replace those with similar options that just have sacrifice abilities on themselves. So another card here, we got Remorseful Cleric, 1 and a white for a 2/1 Spirit Cleric with flying. It says sacrifice Remorseful Cleric and exile target player's graveyard. So just a little bit of graveyard hate here on this guy for a little 2-drop. Sacrificing, you know, you get your commander's ability and you can exile that graveyard player's graveyard so they can't reanimate whatever they need to. We also have cards like Shriekmaw, 4 and a black for a 3/2 elemental with fear, and it says when Shriekmaw enters the battlefield, destroy target non-artifact non-black creature, but it also has Evoke, 1 and a black. So for those of you that don't know, Evoke means that you can cast this spell for its Evoke cost, which is only 2 mana, and if you do, you sacrifice it when it enters the battlefield. So you still get your ETB trigger, you pay the 2 mana, you kill a non-artifact non-black creature that your opponent has, and then you sacrifice this, which does trigger your commander's ability. I usually don't like cards like Shriekmaw in normal decks because I don't really like the restrictions, but since it does provide that extra value with our commander's ability, I think it's worth it in a deck like this. Also, we have ways of forcing our opponents to sacrifice, such as Fleshbag Marauder. It's 2 and a black for a 3/1 zombie warrior. It says when Fleshbag Marauder enters the battlefield, each player sacrifices a creature. So you force each of your opponents to sacrifice something. It could be a token, whatever, but if they only have 1 creature, if they only have their commander out, they're going to have to sacrifice that, which is pretty good. And we get to choose the Fleshbag itself. So you always have the target if you don't have anything else to sacrifice, like one of your tokens or something. We do have some token makers in the deck that do help us fulfill that sacrifice clause on our commander, just in case we don't have enough of our other cards that sacrifice themselves to be able to get this trigger as many times as we can. So the first one in this category I'm going to be talking about is Skrelv's Hive. It's 1 and a white for an enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, you lose 1 life, and you create a 1/1 colorless Phyrexian Might artifact creature token with Toxic 1, and this creature can't block. Also has Corrupted. As long as an opponent has 3 or more poison counters, creatures you control with Toxic have lifelink. So that doesn't really matter. We're not going to be really attacking with these unless, you know, we don't need to sacrifice them right away. Say our commander is off the battlefield or something like that. They do have lifelink. Once we hit our opponent with enough to get them up to 3 poison counters, then they could have, you know, some potential in gaining its life, because we are in somewhat of a life gain theme with our commander's first trigger. So that could also be useful, but the main reason we're using this is to gain a 1/1 token every single one of our upkeeps so that we can sacrifice it to other abilities a little bit later on. Another really, really cool one I like here is Oketra's Monument, 3 mana for a legendary artifact. It says white creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. So the main use for that one is just to have our commander cost 1 less. There's only about 7 total white creatures that will benefit off of this in the deck, which is still a decent amount. It's just a little added bonus to the second ability, which is whenever you cast a creature spell, create a 1/1 white warrior creature token with vigilance. So just another way we can pump out those tokens so that we can sacrifice them to some of our other abilities, which I'll talk about a little bit later on. You know, we have about, I think, 30 or 31 creatures in the deck, so this is going to be triggering quite a lot. We're going to get a lot of tokens off of this. Also, the little boost to our commander being cheaper to cast is always nice. Lastly, I'm talking about here is Endrick Sar Master Breeder. It's 4 and a black for a 2/2 human wizard. It says whenever you cast cast a creature spell, create X 1/1 black Thrall creature tokens where X is that spell's mana value. When you control 7 or more Thralls, you sacrifice Endrick Star Master Breeder. So this one is a little bit harder to control in a deck like this. However, I think we have enough sacrifice options in the deck that we don't really have to worry about losing our Endrick Star. You know, even if we have already done the 3 sacrifice permanents this turn for our commander's ability, but you still need to cast a creature spell and you're going to go over the 7 and you're going to have to sacrifice it. I think it's fine to just sacrifice a couple of them so you don't lose your Endrick Star, and then you're always going to have the fodder for your commander, which when you have Endrick Star out and you're casting creatures, you're going to have so many tokens that you're going to be able to activate Vito on other people's turns too, just by sacrificing some of the tokens that it creates. So I really like this one in the deck. However, you are going to have to play around it. So like I was saying earlier, there's tons of ways that we can sacrifice our own creatures, such as Spawning Pit. It's 2 mana for an artifact. You sacrifice a creature at instant speed. You don't have to tap it or nothing. You can do this infinite amount of times to put a charge counter on Spawning Pit. Then you pay 1, remove 2 charge counters from Spawning Pit, and you create a 2/2 colorless spawn artifact creature token. So you're getting half the amount of tokens from it. Now you do have to pay the mana. You know, you have a bunch of Thralls from Endrick Sar. You sacrifice a bunch of them, put a bunch of charge counters on here, and you can create even more tokens. So that just contributes to the amount of sacrifice permanents that we are sacrificing every turn. Another one similarly, we got like Viscera Seer. It's a black for a 1/1 vampire wizard. It says sacrifice a creature, scry 1. So this one is one of the better ones. For 1, it's so cheap, and 2, you could do it any amount of times. Doesn't have to tap. So you just get to choose what you're going to be drawing into with a card like Viscera Seer. I really like this one. Speaking of drawing cards, we got cards like Culling Deus here. It's 2 mana for an artifact. Tap, sacrifice a creature, put a charge counter on Culling Deus, pay 1, sacrifice Culling Deus, draw a card for each charge counter on Culling Deus. So if you can get this out a little bit early, sacrifice those creatures to this as opposed to some of our other abilities like, you know, Viscera Seer or whatever, this could end up drawing us a whole fresh new hand a little bit later in the game if we can get those counters on it. I'd say probably the best draw option in the deck is because it's so versatile and what it's doing is Priest of Forgotten Gods. It's 1 and a black for a 1/2 human cleric, has tap, sacrifice 2 other creatures, so it's a little bit more intensive, but it's so worth it. Any number of target players each lose 2 life, so your opponents each lose 2, and they each sacrifice a creature, and then you add black, and draw a card. So again, with that Endrick Sar, you have 2 Thralls, which is super easy to get. All you have to do is cast a 2-drop. You get 2 Thralls. Tap your Priest of Forgotten Gods, sack those 2 Thralls. Each opponent loses 2. They each sacrifice a creature. That's 3 creatures down, and you add black, and draw a card. This is absolutely phenomenal value in this deck. It is a little expensive. It's about $4 right now, and this is a little bit over what I usually do in my decks. You know, I don't usually put cards in over $3 unless they're really, really good, which this card is fantastic. So I recommend this one highly. And like I said, we are doing a little bit of life gain in the deck with our commander's first ability, which is the easiest one to get because it's the first sacrifice permanent per turn. So I threw in Well of Lost Dreams. It's 4 mana for an artifact. Whenever you gain life, you may pay X, where X is less than or equal to the amount of life you gained if you do draw X cards. So you can gain the 2 life, pay 2 mana, draw 2 cards on the first sacrifice permanent each turn. I didn't put too much life gain support in the deck, but I feel like this one is good enough to be able to fit here just because we are gaining that 2 life every time we sacrifice a permanent, the first one anyway, each turn. So that one I think is worth it to throw in the deck. And then of course we've got some recursion in the deck. You are in Orzhov, so you should be recurring some of your creatures. That way you can re-sacrifice them a little bit later. So first up we got Whisper Blood Liturgist. I think it's Liturgist or Liturgist. I think it's Liturgist. 3 and a black for a 2/2 human cleric. Tap, sacrifice 2 creatures, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. So unlike Priest of Forgotten Gods, Whisper can actually sacrifice himself. Doesn't have to sacrifice 2 other creatures. That could be one of them if you need to. But there is a little bit of loops you can get into here. You know, you sacrifice a couple of your tokens, you can get back a card like Priest of Fell Rites. It's a black and a white for a 2/2 human warlock. It says tap, pay 3 life, sacrifice Priest of Fell Rites, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield only as a sorcery. Also has Unearth for 3 white black. So you sacrifice some of your tokens, you get back your priest, you sacrifice it to get back something else, get back something else. So there's a lot of loops you can go through here with some of our recursion packages. We also have something like Oversold Cemetery, 1 and a black for an enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you have 4 or more creature cards in your graveyard, you may return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. So this one isn't exactly recursion, but it is helping us get back creature cards from our graveyard to our hand, so that way we can replay them against stuff like, you know, our Fleshbag Marauder or Shriekmaw or whatever it may be to help us, you know, remove things or whatever we can use them for. I like Oversold Cemetery in a deck like this because we're going to have so many creatures in our graveyard already. Also, we've got another new card here from Ixalan. It's Carmen, Cruel Skymarcher, 3 white black for a 2/2 vampire soldier with flying. It says whenever a player sacrifices a permanent, put a +1/+1 counter on Carmen, Cruel Skymarcher, and you gain 1 life. So that already plays into our commander's ability. So when you have this out and your Vito, you're going gonna be at least 3 life a turn whenever you sacrifice one thing. Could be gaining more even off the Carmen. Also, whenever Carmen attacks, return up to 1 target permanent card with mana value less than or equal to Carmen's power from your graveyard to the battlefield. Obviously, you're sacrificing a bunch of permanents. It's gonna be easy to get your Carmen above 2 power, but even if you stay at 2 power and you don't have anything else, you attack with it, you can get back your Remorseful Cleric, you can get back your Selfless Spirit, your Selfless Savior, a bunch of cards that are under 2 mana in the deck that we can get back with Carmen without even having to sacrifice anything. That's the floor. You know, the ceiling, who knows? You can sacrifice a bunch of permanents, 3 per turn or whatever. You can get back pretty much anything in the deck. It's not really a big deal. Next up, we'll go over some of the ramp. I don't usually talk about the ramp, but it is pretty unique in this deck since we're focusing on the sacrificing thing. First up, not so unique, is Wayfarer's Bauble. It's 1 mana for an artifact. Pay 2 tap, sacrifice Wayfarer's Bauble, search your library for a basic land card, put that card onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. So this one's pretty well known. However, I don't think it goes in every single deck, but it is pretty nice in this one that it does sacrifice itself, getting those triggers off our commander if we happen to draw after we play our commander. Another one, obviously, Mind Stone. You can throw a Commander Sphere in here too, but it's 2 mana, tap, add a colorless, you pay 1, tap, sack it, draw a card. So a little bit later, you draw a card off of this and also gives you that sack trigger. One I really like in the deck here is Lotho Corrupt Sheriff. It's a white and a black for a 2/1 halfling rogue. It says whenever a player casts their second spell each turn, you lose 1 life and create a treasure token. So on a budget, there's not too many ways to get loads of treasure tokens or repeatable ways to get treasure tokens, unlike Lotho, which is repeatable. Another one you can throw in here is Monologue Tax, but I think that one is climbing in price, so I didn't throw that one in here. Lotho is already up to like $3 right now, so that's the only one I wanted to incorporate in the deck. It's 2 mana, it's really nice, it's low to the ground. You can sacrifice it to some of your other things, unlike the Monologue Tax, which is enchantment. So this one, being able to get you those treasure tokens each turn is a really cool one in the deck. I like being able to get those treasures. That just helps us ramp for other ways, as well as giving those sacrifice triggers. So the next one I got here, Crowded Crypt, 2 and a black for an artifact, tap, add black, and whenever a creature you control dies, put a corpse counter on Crowded Crypt. You can pay 4 black, sacrifice Crowded Crypt, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token with Decayed for each corpse counter on Crowded Crypt. There's so much to talk about here. 1, it's a 3 mana that taps for black, doesn't come in tapped. That's already good. Whenever a creature you control dies, put a corpse counter on it. That's going to happen a lot. We have a lot of creatures we're going to be sacrificing, creatures with their own abilities that sacrifice themselves and the tokens that we're going to be sacrificing. Later in the game, when you have enough counters on this, you pay the 6 mana, get a ton of zombies. They each have Decayed, which means, say you only have this, you have no other ways to sacrifice them. They can sacrifice themselves to their own Decayed ability, because a creature with Decayed can't block, and when it attacks, you sacrifice it at the end of combat. I think this is a great card in a lot of black decks. Almost any Aristocrats deck, you probably should be running this. I know people say 3 mana rocks are unplayable, or they're a lot worse than the 2 mana ones. I would rather pay 1 more mana to get this mana rock that has such a huge advantage late game if we need it. Another really fun one that I love having in decks is Bucknard's Everfull Purse. It's 2 mana for an artifact, pay 1, tap, roll a d4, create a number of treasure tokens equal to the result. The player to your right gains control of Bucknard's Everfull Purse. So it's a little group huggy. I don't really mind cards like this, giving a little bit of advantage to your opponents while also getting advantage yourself. You could get lucky and get those 4 treasures per turn or whatever. It's happened multiple times to me. I play this card in a few decks, so it's nice to be able to get those treasures on every other turn about. Even if it helps out your opponents, I think it's still worth throwing in the deck. Lastly, for ramp here, I got Black Market, 3 black for an enchantment. Whenever a creature dies, put a charge counter on Black Market. And at the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, add black for each charge counter on Black Market. So since we're having so many creatures die, also forcing some of our opponents to sacrifice creatures or removal or however, this also counts your opponent's creatures. So any creatures dying, push charge counters on this, and then you get a ton of mana on your pre-combat main phase, which is pretty nice because we do have some higher costed spells in the deck. Sun Titan, our commander could get up in commander attack. So Black Market is definitely a must have in this deck. All right, and last but not least, we're going to go over some of the utility in the deck, just the general good stuff cards that don't exactly fit into other categories, but are really useful in the deck. So first up, I got Dark Privilege. It's 1 and a black for an aura. It says enchanted creature gets +1/+1, and you can sacrifice a creature to regenerate enchanted creature. So you throw this on your commander, as soon as you can get it out, spend the 2 mana, and if you have other sack fodder, it's going to be really hard to get rid of your commander, which players might actually want to do a little bit later in the game, since it's going to be draining them for 2 almost every turn, and then you're going to be creating that 4/3 in the air, which is also really strong. Another way that you're going to be able to win is with the tokens. So your commander is really important to this deck, so having some options to protect it is always nice. Another fun one here, I got Kami of False Hope. It's 1 single white pip for a 1/1 spirit. Sacrifice Kami, prevent all combat damage that would be dealt this turn. So it's a fog. However, I kind of like the onboard effects like, Soul Snare, Kami of False Hope, things that are going to prevent your opponents attacking you because they know it's futile. They know that if they attack you, they're going to have to force you to use this eventually. So they might just attack a different opponent altogether. And so you can keep this up. It's kind of like, I don't really want to waste my attack and force him to use it. I'd probably rather get somebody else to do it for me so they just won't attack you at all. It's kind of like a ghostly prison in that way. They don't want to have to pay the 2. They don't want to have their combat fogged. So I really like Kami of False Hope. Also, it's a sacrifice itself. It's great. Another similarly, we got Selfless Spirit, 1 and a white for 2/1 Spirit Cleric with flying. It says sacrifice Selfless Spirit, creatures you control gain indestructible till end of turn, just like the Kami. Somebody sees a Selfless Spirit on board, you have a huge wide board, and your opponent has a board wipe. Are they really going to use it when your Selfless Spirit is up, or are they going to wait till it's gone to do that first? So it's like double board protection because your opponents aren't going to want to do it when this is up, and if they do it when this is up, you do have the answer, so it doesn't really matter either way. Last but not least, I know this isn't really a traditional Aristocrats strategy, but I thought I'd throw in one backup for our commander, and that is Vran Executioner Thane. It's 1 and a black for a 2/2 Phyrexian Vampire. Whenever one or more other creatures you control die, each opponent loses 2 life, and you gain 2 life. This ability triggers only once each turn. So unlike some other decks that, you know, if you have a backup for your commander, it doesn't really do much when your commander's out, this one also does really well when your commander is out. So I think if you wanted to do more of these Aristocrat style cards, you know, like Elisol Core or the Blood Artist type effects, you can throw them in the deck. I didn't want to do it in mine because I wanted to have mine a little bit more unique than the typical Aristocrats deck. So that's pretty much all I got for the Vito Fanatic of Aclazotz deck. You know, I could talk about the lands, but just look up all the lands that sacrifice themselves to do things. You know, Fair Basilica draws cards, you know, Tyrite Sanctum can give your commander indestructible. You have all your Myriad Landscapes and Evolving Wilds. So just look up all the lands that sacrifice themselves. You know, get your fetch lands if you have them, put them in the stack. The lands are also really good, but I don't really need to talk about that. So that is pretty much all I got for the Vito deck. I think this one could be a really interesting, fun, and powerful deck. You know, having your opponents lose life every turn, also creating 4/3 flyers every turn, that's a lot of damage in the air, and a lot of decks aren't equipped to protect from those 4/3 vampire tokens that you're creating with your commander. So I really like this one. I think it's going to be a fun deck to play with. If you want to see the full deck list, it's going to be down in the description. Just go ahead and click my Archidect link. And if you enjoyed this video, I'd really appreciate if you leave a like or subscribe for some future content that I am planning on making. Anyway, thanks so much for watching, everybody, and I'll see you guys in the next one. All right, take care.